Hi, Munchkins. So you may or may not know, the governor decided today that there will be no more school at the school building this year. We'll still keep learning together online. I know that probably some of you are really sad about that. I know I am really sad about that. I just wasn't really ready for our school year to end, and I miss all of you. And I'm just sad that we will miss out on a lot of our end of the year fun that we had planned. I miss seeing all of your sweet faces. I'm just sad that I won't be seeing them every day in person. I'm sad that I will not be getting H's from each of you every day. I really miss that. I really, really miss our hugs and our high fives and our handshakes at the end of the day. But we will just figure out a new way to do school, and might be online, it might be some packets like we made, it might be both. I don't really know yet. I'll have that information coming for you as soon as I have it. But just know that I am still thinking about each one of you every day. Just because our face-to-face school year ended doesn't mean that I'm not thinking about you. So each and every day I'm thinking about each of you, and I'm still loving each of you each day. So we will just figure out a new way to do school together. It will be like an adventure for all of us. If you want to, feel free to send me an email. Let me know how you're feeling about things. Let me know how you're doing. Let me know what you're thinking. Let me know anything you want to let me know. So for today, I am going to read our last chapter in our book today. Chapter 12. As Violet and Klaus Baudelaire stood, still in their nightgown and pajamas, backstage at Count Olaf's theater, they were of two minds, a phrase which here means they felt two different ways at the same time. On one hand, they were of course filled with dread. From the murmur of voices they heard on the stage, the two Baudelaire orphans could tell that the performance of the marvelous marriage had begun, and it seemed too late to do anything to foil Count Olaf's plan. On the other hand, however, they were fascinated, as they had never been backstage at a theatrical production, and there was so much to see. Members of Count Olaf's theater troupe hurried this way and that, too busy to even glance at the children. Three very short men were carrying a large flat piece of wood, painted to look like a living room. The two white-faced women were arranging flowers in a vase that from far away appeared to be marble, but close up looked more like cardboard. An important-looking man with warts all over his face was adjusting enormous light fixtures. As the children peeked on stage, they could see Count Olaf, in his fancy suit, declaiming some lines from the play, just as the curtain came down, controlled by a woman with very short hair who was pulling on a long rope attached to a pulley. Despite their fear, you see, the two older Baudelaires were very interested in what was going on, and only wished that they were not involved in any way. As the curtain fell, Count Olaf strode off stage and looked at the children. "It's the end of Act 2. Why aren't the orphans in their costumes?" he hissed to the two white-faced women. Then, as the audience broke into applause, his angry expression turned to one of joy, and he walked back on stage. Gesturing to the short-haired woman to raise the curtain, he strode to the exact center of the stage and took elaborate bows as the curtain came up. He waved and blew kisses to the audience as the curtain came down again, and then his face once again filled with anger. "Intermission is only 10 minutes, he said, "and then the children must perform. Get them into costumes, quickly." Without a word, the two white-faced women grabbed Violet and Klaus by the wrists and led them into a dressing room. The room was dusty but shiny, covered in mirrors and tiny lights so the actors could see better to put on their makeup and wigs, and there were people calling out to one another and laughing as they changed their clothes. One white-faced woman yanked Violet's arms up and pulled her nightgown over her head and thrust a dirty, lacy white dress to her to put on. Klaus, meanwhile, had his pajamas removed by the other white-faced woman and was hurriedly stuffed into a blue sailor suit that itched and made him look like a toddler. "Isn't this exciting?" said a voice, and the children turned to see Justice Strauss, all dressed up in her judge's robes and powdered wig. She was clutching a small book. "You children look wonderful." "So do you," Klaus said. "What's that book?" Why, those are my lines, Justice Strauss said. Count Olaf told me to bring a law book and read the real wedding ceremony in order to make the play as realistic as possible. All you have to say, Violet, is, I do. But I have to make quite a speech. This is going to be such fun. You know what would be fun, Violet said carefully, is if you changed your lines around just a little. Klaus's face lit up. Yes, Justice Strauss. Be creative. There's no reason to stick to the legal ceremony. It's not as if it's a real wedding. Justice Strauss frowned. I don't know about that, children, she said. I think it would be best to follow Count Olaf's instructions. After all, he's in charge. Justice Strauss, a voice called. Justice Strauss, please report to the makeup artist. Oh my word, I get to wear makeup. Justice Strauss had on a dreamy expression, as if she were about to be crowned queen instead of just having some powders and creams smeared on her face. Children, I must go. See you on stage, my dears. Justice Strauss ran off, leaving the children to finish changing into their costumes. One of the white-faced women put a flowered headdress on Violet, who realized in horror that the dress she had changed into was a bridal gown. The other woman put a sailor cap on Klaus, who gazed in one of the mirrors, astonished at how ugly he looked. His eyes met those of Violet, who was looking in the mirror as well. What can we do? Klaus said quietly. Pretend to be sick? Maybe they'd call off the performance. Count Olaf would know what we were up to, Violet replied glumly. Act 3 of The Marvelous Marriage by Al von Coote is about to begin. A man with a clipboard shouted, Everyone, please get in your places for Act 3. The actors rushed out of the room, and the white-faced women grabbed the children and hustled them out after them. The backstage area was in complete pandemonium, a word which here means actors and stagehands running around attending to last-minute details. The bald man with the long nose hurried by the children, then stopped himself, looked at Violet in her wedding dress, and smirked. No funny stuff, he said to them, waggling a bony finger. Remember, when you go out there, just do exactly what you're supposed to do. Count Olaf will be holding his walkie-talkie during the entire act, and if you do even one thing wrong, he'll be giving Sonny a call up there in the tower. Yes, Klaus said bitterly. He was tired of being threatened in the same way over and over. You'd better do exactly as planned, the man said again. I'm sure they will, said a voice suddenly, and the children turned to see Mr. Poe, dressed very formally and accompanied by his wife. He smiled at the children and came over to shake their hands. Polly and I just wanted to tell you to break a leg. What? Klaus said, alarmed. That's a theater term, Mr. Poe explained, meaning good luck on tonight's performance. I'm glad that you children have adjusted to life with your new father and are participating in family activities. Mr. Poe, Klaus said quickly, Violet and I have something to tell you. It's very important. What is it? Mr. Poe said. Yes, said Count Olaf. What is it you have to tell Mr. Poe, children? Count Olaf had appeared seemingly out of nowhere, and his shiny eyes glared at the children meaningfully. In one hand, Violet and Klaus could see he held a walkie-talkie. Just that we appreciate all you've done for us, Mr. Poe, Klaus said weakly. That's all we wanted to say. Of course, Mr. Poe said, patting him on the back. Well, Polly and I had better take our seats. Break a leg, Baudelaires. I wish we could break a leg, Klaus whispered to Violet, and Mr. Poe laughed. You will, soon enough, Count Olaf said, pushing the two children toward the stage. Other actors were milling about, finding their places for Act 3, and Justice Strauss was off in a corner, practicing her lines from her law book. Klaus took a look around the stage, wondering if anyone there could help. The bald man with the long nose took Klaus's hand and led him to one side. You and I will stand here for the duration of the act. That means the whole thing. I know what the word duration means, Klaus said. No nonsense, the bald man said. Klaus watched his sister in her wedding gown take her place next to Count Olaf as the curtain rose. Klaus heard applause from the audience as Act 3 of The Marvelous Marriage began. It will be of no interest to you if I describe the action of this insipid, the word insipid here means dull and foolish, play by Al von Coote, because it was a dreadful play, and of no real importance to our story. Various actors and actresses performed very dull dialogue and moved around the set, as Klaus tried to make eye contact with them and see if they would help. He soon realized that this play must have been chosen merely as an excuse for Olaf's evil plan, and not for its entertainment value, as he sensed the audience losing interest and moving around in their seats. Klaus turned his attention to the audience to see whether any of them would notice that something was afoot, but the way the wart-faced man had arranged the lights prevented Klaus from seeing the faces in the auditorium, and he could only make out the dim outlines of the people in the audience. Count Olaf had a great number of very long speeches, which he performed with elaborate gestures and facial expressions. No one seemed to notice that he held a walkie-talkie the entire time. Finally, Justice Strauss began speaking, and Klaus saw that she was reading directly from the legal book. Her eyes were sparkling and her face flushed as she performed on stage for the first time, too stage-struck to realize that she was a part of Olaf's plan. She spoke on and on about Olaf and Violet caring for each other in sickness and in health, in good times and bad, and all of those things that are said to many people who decide, for one reason or another, to get married. When she finished her speech, Justice Strauss turned to Count Olaf and said, "Do you take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife?" "I do," Count Olaf said, smiling. Klaus saw Violet shudder. "Do you," Justice Strauss said, turning to Violet, "take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband?" "I do," Violet said. Klaus clenched his fists. His sister had said "I do" in the presence of a judge. Once she signed the official document, the wedding was legally valid. And now Klaus could see that Justice Strauss was taking the document from one of the other actors and holding it out to Violet to sign. "Don't move an inch," the bald man muttered to Klaus, and Klaus thought of poor Sonny dangling at the top of the tower and stood still as he watched Violet take a long quill pen from Count Olaf. Violet's eyes were wide as she looked down at the document, and her face was pale and her left hand was trembling as she signed her name. We have one more chapter. I thought we were almost done. Chapter 13. "And now, ladies and gentlemen," Count Olaf said, stepping forward to address the audience, "I have an announcement. There is no reason to continue tonight's performance, for its purpose has been served. This has not been a scene of fiction. My marriage to Violet Baudelaire is perfectly legal, and now I am in control of her entire fortune." There were gasps from the audience, and some of the actors looked at one another in shock. Not everyone, apparently, had known about Olaf's plan. "That can't be," Justice Strauss cried. "The marriage laws in this community are quite simple," Count Olaf said. "The bride must say 'I do' in the presence of a judge like yourself and sign an explanatory document. And all of you," here Count Olaf gestured out to the audience, "are witnesses." "But Violet is only a child," one of the actors said. "She's not old enough to marry." "She is if her legal guardian agrees," Count Olaf said, "and in addition to being her husband, I am her legal guardian." "But that piece of paper is not an official document," Justice Strauss said. "That's just a stage prop." Count Olaf took the paper from Violet's hand and gave it to Justice Strauss. "I think if you look at it closely, you'll see it is an official document from City Hall." Justice Strauss took the document in her hand and read it quickly. Then, closing her eyes, she sighed deeply and furrowed her brow, thinking hard. Klaus watched her and wondered if this were the expression Justice Strauss had on her face whenever she was serving on the High Court. "You're right," she said finally to Count Olaf. "This marriage, unfortunately, is completely legal. Violet said 'I do' and signed her name here on this paper. Count Olaf, you are Violet's husband and therefore in complete control of her estate." "That can't be," said a voice from the audience, and Klaus recognized it as the voice of Mr. Poe. He ran up the stairs to the stage and took the document from Justice Strauss. "This is dreadful nonsense." "I'm afraid this dreadful nonsense is the law," Justice Strauss said. Her eyes were filling up with tears. "I can't believe how easily I was tricked," she said. "I would never do anything to harm you children. Never." "You were easily tricked," Count Olaf said, grinning, and the judge began to cry. "It was child's play winning this fortune. Now, if all of you will excuse me, my bride and I need to go home for our wedding night." "First let Sonny go," Klaus burst out. "You promised to let her go." "Where is Sonny?" Mr. Poe asked. "She's all tied up at the moment," Count Olaf said, if you'll pardon a little joke. His eyes shone as he pressed buttons on the walkie-talkie and waited while the hook-handed man answered. "Hello? Yes, of course it's me, you idiot. Everything has gone according to plan. Please remove Sonny from her cage and bring her directly to the theater. Klaus and Sonny have some chores to do before they go to bed." Count Olaf gave Klaus a sharp look. "Are you satisfied now?" he asked. "Yes," Klaus said quietly. He wasn't satisfied at all, of course, but at least his baby sister was no longer dangling from a tower. "Don't think you're so safe," the bald man whispered to Klaus. "Count Olaf will take care of you and your sisters later. He doesn't want to do it in front of all these people." He did not have to explain to Klaus what he meant by the phrase, "take care of." "Well, I'm not satisfied at all," Mr. Poe said. "This is absolutely horrendous. This is completely monstrous. This is financially dreadful." I'm afraid, however, Count Olaf said, that it is legally binding. Tomorrow, Mr. Poe, I shall come down to the bank and withdraw the complete Baudelaire fortune. Mr. Poe opened his mouth as if to say something, but began to cough instead. For several seconds he coughed into a handkerchief while everyone waited for him to speak. I won't allow it, Mr. Poe finally gasped, wiping his mouth. I absolutely will not allow it. I'm afraid you have to, Count Olaf replied. I'm afraid Olaf is right, Justice Strauss said through her tears. This marriage is legally binding. Begging your pardon, Violet said suddenly, but I think you may be wrong. Everyone turned to look at the eldest Baudelaire orphan. What did you say, Countess? Olaf said. I'm not your countess, Violet said testily, a word which here means in an extremely annoyed tone. At least I don't think I am. And why is that? Count Olaf said. I did not sign the document in my own hand, as the law states, Violet said. What do you mean? We all saw you. Count Olaf's eyebrow was beginning to rise in anger. I'm afraid your husband is right, dear, Justice Strauss said sadly. There's no use denying it. There are too many witnesses. Like most people, Violet said, I am right-handed, but I signed the document with my left hand. What? Count Olaf cried. He snatched the paper from Justice Strauss and looked down at it. His eyes were shining very bright. You are a liar, he hissed at Violet. No, she's not, Klaus said excitedly. I remember because I watched her left hand trembling as she signed her name. It is impossible to prove, Count Olaf said. If you like, Violet said, I shall be happy to sign my name again on a separate sheet of paper with my right hand and then with my left. Then we can see which signature the one on the document most resembles. A small detail, like which hand you use to sign, Count Olaf said, doesn't matter in the least. If you don't mind, sir, Mr. Poe said, I'd like Justice Strauss to make that decision. Everyone looked at Justice Strauss, who was wiping away the last of her tears. Let me see, she said quietly, and closed her eyes again. She sighed deeply, and the Baudelaire orphans, and all who liked them, held their breath as Justice Strauss furrowed her brow, thinking hard on the situation. Finally, she smiled. If Violet is indeed right-handed, she said carefully, and she signed the document with her left hand, then it follows that the signature does not fulfill the requirements of the nuptial laws. The law clearly states the document must be signed in the bride's own hand. Therefore, we can conclude that this marriage is invalid. Violet, you are not a countess, and Count Olaf, you are not in control of the Baudelaire fortune. Hooray! Cried a voice from the audience, and several people applauded. Unless you are a lawyer, it will probably strike you as odd that Count Olaf's plan was defeated by Violet signing with her left hand instead of her right. But the law is an odd thing. For instance, one country in Europe has a law that requires all its bakers to sell bread at the exact same price. A certain island has a law that forbids anyone from removing its fruit. And a town not too far from where you live has a law that bars me from coming within 5 miles of its borders. Had Violet signed the marriage contract with her right hand, the law would have made her a miserable contessa. But because she signed it with her left, she remained, to her relief, a miserable orphan. What was good news to Violet and her siblings, of course, was bad news to Count Olaf. Nevertheless, he gave everyone a grim smile. In that case, he said to Violet, pushing a button on the walkie-talkie, you will either marry me again, and correctly this time, or I will... Neepo! Sunny's unmistakable voice rang out over Count Olaf's as she tottered on stage toward her siblings. The hook-handed man followed behind her, his walkie-talkie buzzing and crackling. Count Olaf was too late. Sunny, you're safe, Klaus cried, and embraced her. Violet rushed over, and the 2 older Baudelaires fussed over the youngest one. Somebody bring her something to eat, Violet said. She must be very hungry after hanging in a tower window all that time. Cake, Sunny shrieked. Ugh, Count Olaf roared. He began to pace back and forth like an animal in a cage, pausing only to point a finger at Violet. You may not be my wife, he said, but you are still my daughter, and... Do you honestly think, Mr. Poe said in an exasperated voice, that I will allow you to continue to care for these 3 children after the treachery I have seen here tonight? The orphans are mine, Count Olaf insisted, and with me they shall stay. There is nothing illegal about trying to marry someone. But there is something illegal about dangling an infant out of a tower window, Justice Strauss said indignantly. You, Count Olaf, will go to jail, and the 3 children will live with me. Arrest him, a voice said from the audience, and other people took up the cry. Send him to jail. He's an evil man, and give us our money back. It was a lousy play. Mr. Poe took Count Olaf's arm and after a brief eruption of coughs announced in a harsh voice, "I hereby arrest you in the name of the law." "Oh, Justice Strauss," Violet said, "did you really mean what you said? Can we really live with you?" "Of course I mean it," Justice Strauss said. "I am very fond of you children, and I feel responsible for your welfare." "Can we use your library every day?" Klaus asked. "Can we work in the garden?" Violet asked. "Cake!" Sunny shrieked again, and everyone laughed. At this point in the story, I feel obliged to interrupt and give you one last warning. As I said at the very beginning, the book you are holding in your hands does not have a happy ending. It may appear now that Count Olaf will go to jail and that the 3 Baudelaire youngsters will live happily ever after with Justice Strauss, but it is not so. If you like, you may shut the book this instant and not read the unhappy ending that is to follow. You may spend the rest of your life believing that the Baudelaires triumphed over Count Olaf and lived the rest of their lives in the house and library of Justice Strauss. But that is not how the story goes. Should we just close the book and leave it there? No? Okay. For as everyone was laughing at Sunny's cry for cake, the important-looking man with all the warts on his face was sneaking toward the controls for the lighting of the theater. Quick as a wink, the man flicked the main switch so that all the lights went off and everyone was standing in darkness. Instantly, pandemonium ensued as everyone ran this way and that, shouting at one another. Actors tripped over members of the audience tripped over theatrical props. Mr. Poe grabbed his wife, thinking it was Count Olaf. Klaus grabbed Sunny and held her up as high as he could so she wouldn't get hurt. But Violet knew at once what had happened and made her way carefully to where she remembered the lights had been. When the play was being performed, Violet had watched the light controls carefully, taking mental notes in case these devices came in handy for an invention. She was certain if she could find the switch, she could turn it back on. Her arms stretched in front of her as if she were blind, Violet made her way across the stage, stepping carefully around pieces of furniture and startled actors. In the darkness, Violet looked like a ghost, her white wedding gown moving slowly across the stage. Then, just as she had reached the switch, Violet felt a hand on her shoulder. A figure leaned in to whisper into her ear. "I'll get my hands on your fortune if it's the last thing I do," the voice hissed. "And when I have it, I'll kill you and your siblings with my own 2 hands." Violet gave a little cry of terror but flicked the switch on. The entire theater was flooded with light. Everyone blinked and looked around. Mr. Poe let go of his wife. Klaus put Sunny down, but nobody was touching Violet's shoulder. Count Olaf was gone. "Where did he go?" Mr. Poe shouted. "Where did they all go?" The Baudelaire youngsters looked around and saw that not only had Count Olaf vanished, but his accomplices, the wart-faced man, the hook-handed man, the bald man with the long nose, the enormous person who looked like neither a man nor a woman, and the 2 white-faced women, had vanished along with him. "They must have run outside," Klaus said, while it was still dark. Mr. Poe led the way outside, and Justice Strauss and the children followed. Way down the block, they could see a long black car driving away into the night. Maybe it contained Count Olaf and his associates. Maybe it didn't. But in any case, it turned a corner and disappeared into the dark city as the children watched without a word. "Blast it," Mr. Poe said. "They're gone. But don't worry, children. We'll catch them. I'm going to call the police immediately." Violet, Klaus, and Sunny looked at one another and knew that it wasn't as simple as Mr. Poe said. Count Olaf would take care to stay out of sight as he planned his next move. He was far too clever to be captured by the likes of Mr. Poe. "Well, let's go home, children," Justice Strauss said. "We can worry about this in the morning when I've fixed you a good breakfast." Mr. Poe coughed. "Wait a minute," he said, looking down at the floor. "I'm sorry to tell you this, children, but I cannot allow you to be raised by someone who is not a relative." "What?" Violet cried. "After all Justice Strauss has done for us?" "We never would have figured out Count Olaf's plan without her and her library," Klaus said. "Without Justice Strauss, we would have lost our lives." "That may be so," Mr. Poe said, "and I thank Justice Strauss for her generosity, but your parents' will is very specific. You must be adopted by a relative. Tonight you will stay with me in my home, and tomorrow I shall go to the bank and figure out what to do with you. I'm sorry, but that is the way it is." The children looked at Justice Strauss, who sighed heavily and hugged each of the Baudelaire youngsters in turn. "Mr. Poe was right," she said sadly. "He must respect your parents' wishes. Don't you want to do what your parents wanted, children?" Violet, Klaus, and Sunny pictured their loving parents and wished more than ever that the fire had not occurred. Never, never had they felt so alone. They wanted very badly to live with this kind and generous woman, but they knew that it simply could not be done. I guess you're right, Justice Strauss, Violet said finally. We will miss you very much. I will miss you too, she said, and her eyes filled with tears once more. Then they each gave Justice Strauss one last embrace and followed Mr. and Mrs. Poe to their car. The Baudelaire orphans piled into the back seat and peered out the back window at Justice Strauss, who was crying and waving to them. Ahead of them were the darkened streets, where Count Olaf had escaped to plan more treachery. Behind them was the kind judge who had taken such an interest in the three children. To Violet, Klaus, and Sunny, it seemed that Mr. Poe and the law had made the incorrect decision to take them away from the possibility of a happy life with Justice Strauss and toward an unknown fate with some unknown relative. They didn't understand it, but like so many unfortunate events in life, just because you don't understand it doesn't mean it isn't so. The Baudelaires bunched up together against the cold night air and kept waving out the back window. The car drove farther and farther away until Justice Strauss was merely a speck in the darkness, and it seemed to the children that they were moving in an aberrant. The word aberrant here means very, very wrong and causing much grief. Direction. The end. There is one last page at the end that gives us a clue about the next book. To my kind editor, I am writing to you from the London branch of the Herpetological Society, where I am trying to find out what happened to the reptile collection of Dr. Montgomery, following the tragic events that occurred while the Baudelaire orphans were in his care. An associate of mine will place a small waterproof box in the phone booth of the Electra Hotel at 11 p.m. next Tuesday. Please retrieve it before midnight to avoid it falling into the wrong hands. In the box, you will find my description of these terrible events, entitled The Reptile Room, as well as a map of Lousy Lane, a copy of the film Zombies in the Snow, and Dr. Montgomery's recipe for coconut cream cake. I have also managed to track down one of the few photographs of Dr. Lucafont in order to help Mr. Helquist with his illustrations. Remember, you are my last hope that the tales of the Baudelaire orphans can finally be told to the general public. With all due respect, Lemony Snicket. So there's a little hint at the second book in the series. So I will talk to all of you guys soon. We have another hangout scheduled for tomorrow, so I hope to see lots of your faces there. See you later.